Good morning, everybody. Welcome to class this morning. Thank you for joining me, or thank you for watching later, whichever the case may be. We're going to talk about HTML data tables this morning, which is going to be one of the easier things that we've discussed this semester. It's really simple, not very complex at all. So we're just going to discuss that for a little while. So because of that, it's probably going to be a bit of a shorter live stream today. But before we get started, just one quick announcement, which is that next week here at Cleveland Community College, it is spring break. So I have the week kind of baked into our course schedule to where we can take the week off if we want to. Like the next module is listed as a 2-week module in the syllabus, but really that first week is a break if you want it to be. Not a big deal. We won't have any live streams next week, so whether you're in this class or any of my other classes, we won't do any live streams. I might post a supplementary video because I'll still be here and working, but I kind of want to give you all the opportunity just to have a week to kind of chill, rest, not worry about things for a little bit. So next week being spring break, you can break a little bit if you want to. And for those of you who are behind, that might be a good opportunity to try to get caught up in getting stuff done. But today we're talking about data tables, which it's a relatively easy concept. So what we'll kind of do is we'll talk about when and where and why we use data tables, and we will, just look a little bit at how we program them, because they're really not super complicated. Like this is something that by now, with what we know about how HTML tags work, how the DOM works, all these various things, we should be able to handle this relatively simply. So when we ask the question of what are tables, we should be kind of familiar with tables if we use Excel or if we use, some other sort of charting software, Excel, Google Sheets, whatever. Right? The terminology that we use with tables is going to sound a lot like what you would be used to in using those pieces of software. So our HTML table allows web designers to arrange and organize data, and this is our big point here. This here is our big idea. Because remember, a lot of what we've been discussing throughout the semester is not just how to do these things, but when and where we do these things. Right? Not just how we make a list, but the semantics behind a list, the purpose behind a list. And so when we're talking about the semantics behind a table, we're looking at the purpose behind this table. And our purpose behind using a table is to arrange and organize data. So when you get into a site where you have a lot of data to show to somebody, you want it to look nice, you want people to be able to read it and understand it clearly, and so we use a table for that purpose. Now inside of this table, we can put anything that we want to put. Any of our other HTML elements, anything can go in there. So we see, text, images, hyperlinks, forms, form fields, even other tables we can put inside of a table. And, back in the day, this was the way we laid out websites, is we'd use what we'd call a layout table. Because the ability to do positioning in CSS wasn't as robust or, even non-existent. So we'd use tables to add different parts to our websites and make sure they're in the right place that we wanted them to go. Now that we have CSS, we don't do that anymore. Those layout tables are highly inaccessible, and we'll be talking about accessibility later on in the course, what that means and why we need to focus on it. But you can put anything within a cell in a table. And in our table, our tables are made of rows and columns. Rows being our horizontally arranged cells, and columns are vertically arranged cells. And again, that's some terminology that you should probably used to just based on other software that you use, like Excel or Google Sheets, one of these spreadsheet type programs. We use you use those terms: cell, row, column, so on and so forth. These are things that we're familiar with at this point. And so, as I was saying, back in the early days of HTML, there was no such thing as CSS. Everything was done in the markup, so we would use tables as a means of laying out our websites. And we don't do this anymore. So you might think that, you're going to be cute and you're going to lay out your sites with a table. Don't do that. There are big problems with that. And it's actually a lot easier once we learn CSS to lay things out with CSS, especially when we're getting into things like accessibility. And in the next level, when we talk about responsive web design in the 215 class. It's a whole lot easier for responsive websites, things that go from big to small, small to big, on a website that utilizes CSS to its fullest potential. So our basic components here, these are our basic things that we need. There are some other things that we'll use. But we start out with the basics. The basics things that we have are our table tags. And our table tags here are kind of like our form tags that we talked about last week. This defines the area in which our table exists. So our table tag on its own doesn't lend any appearance. Like, we can style our table tag a little bit if we want to. But the table tag on its own just kind of defines the beginning and the end of the table. It says that everything in between these two tags, everything that is a child of these two tags in our DOM is our table. And so then we have table rows, which defines the beginning and the end of a horizontal row, and that's the TR tags that we see exhibited here. And then TD for table is a cell, and it defines an individual cell. And TD being the kind of odd man out here, right? Because a table tag makes sense because that defines our table. A TR tag makes sense because that defines our table row. TD for our cell. TD stands for table data. So it's an individual piece of data inside of our cell. But it's for our cell, right? So what we see here with our basic table components is that essentially that we're creating a series of nested containers, right? So we have our parent element in our DOM, which is going to be our table. Inside of that table, we're going to have some children of the table that are going to be our table rows, so on and so forth. And inside of each of these table rows, we're going to have table data or cells. They're going to be children of the table rows and grandchildren of our table. So what we're seeing here is just nested container data. And we can apply CSS to all of these elements granularly. We can apply it. We can apply things to a whole table. We can apply things to singular rows. We can apply things to all the rows. We can apply things to singular rows based on what has a specific ID or what has a specific class. And the same thing with cells. We can apply CSS styles to singular cells or all cells at once or whatever. So let's just jump over to a CodePen now and just start to use this sort of markup that we have here in an example. So let me just jump over to the CodePen. Got to find it in my list here. There it is. And so we start off building our table with our table tag. And that's going to be paired. Now we can go down to our preview window. We can look at our preview window at the bottom. We can see that there's nothing there, right? But if we apply some styling to our table tag, we can watch it come into existence. So let's focus that table element. Let's add like a width of maybe 600 pixels, a height of maybe 600 pixels, and a background color so we can actually see it stand out against the background. We'll say red for the time being. So once we do that, we can see this table tag pop out, right? So it's a container, so we can treat it like any other container tag that we've dealt with through the entire semester. Something like form, something like UL or OL, something like div or section or main or whatever. You know, we can style it that way. For the time being now, I'm just going to go ahead and remove all of this CSS from it. But I am going to put a border on my table here so we can kind of see it expand and contract. So we'll put a border, 3 pixels solid. Let's make a fun color here. Let's go for like an orange. FF77 FF7700, let's say. And so right now we have nothing because we have no defined width and height, right? So we're going to let our interior of our table define the width and height of the table container. And we're going to do that by just adding some data to it. So the example that I like to use for doing tables is like a class schedule. So we can have like a class name, a room number, a time, you know, so on and so forth. So I'm going to create TR tags. And those are going to exhibit my table rows. Now I can go ahead and type all of my table data containers inside of here, like so. But I prefer to kind of break things up a little bit. It might make things a little harder for you to kind of wrap your head around because, you know, like you think about table row and then you have everything in a row like this. But I actually like to have my table row tags on a different line from my cells. That way it's a little more readable. But then we can go something like course name. We'll just make this simple. We'll call it math. We'll add another cell for a room number, right? So this will be like, we'll say this will be Hunt 1200. I don't know what room that actually is, if that even is a room. We're just flowing here. That class is on Monday and Wednesday. And that class runs from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., let's say. So now we have our table, which is defined by our table tag, which means that everything that we have from here to here is our table. We have one table row, and we have all of the data items that are within our table row, and we can see what we have here on our preview now. So to make life a little easier on me, I like to take past successes and let them influence future successes. So I'm just going to take that row, copy it, and paste it a couple times. And we can go in here and we can change the data. You know, maybe this is science. Maybe this is English. Maybe this is history. Who's to say, right? And so maybe our science is in that'd probably be the Bailey building. Bailey, those are 5,000 numbers, so let's say 5108. That's going to be on Tuesdays. From, we'll say 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Right? We can just go in through here and we just change all the data. And you can see here, as we look at our preview, we've got some blank space here. So right now we've not styled any of this. We've not added any padding. We've not added any margin. We just have our data in here, but you can see that we have set sizes of these cells. The cells are going to be, unless we tell our CSS otherwise, the cells are going to follow the width of the longest item. So we can see here Monday and Wednesday being longer than Tuesday. Our cells accommodate the longer one. So we have this blank space here. So let's just take a moment and just change up some of the other stuff that we have here. We'll just change some data just to make it what we want it to be. There we go. So now we just have some different data on every row, just to give us something that's a little more visually what we want it to be, right? So we can see here, really simple. All we're working with is just nested containers, containers going within containers. One container defines our table, one container defines our rows, one container defines our cells. Really simple, not complicated at all, right? And so from here, we can start to style this stuff. Now, one thing you might be wondering is, what if I have an extra... Before I get into that, one thing that you might be wondering is, what if I have more cells in one row than in another row? Well, let's see what happens. I'll add another cell here. Maybe this is an honors class. So we have an honors English. And it just adds it just out to the end. The other cells are kind of implied. So it doesn't really impact much here. Like, cells here don't exist, but they're kind of implied because remember, the length of an area comes from the longest data that's in that column. So I can remove that now that we've shown you that. And we could start to add some CSS here just to make our table look a little different. Some things that I might want to do is maybe take and focus my universal selector and make my font family sans serif. That way I have a nice sans serif font on my table. At the table level, I could give it a background color. You know, we might want like a light yellow maybe, so something like a CC. Give us a nice light yellow. We can also focus on our row level. TR. We can put a border on all of those. Border 1px solid. Maybe a little darker yellow. So maybe we want to go like 777733, you know, something like that. Give ourselves a little border around our rows. We need to give ourselves a little bit of padding, a little bit of margin as well. So let's add some padding to our rows. And we don't really need any margin. Let's give this a save. Actually, I think I might need to add this to our cells. Yeah, so we have it on our cells now. Looking pretty nice. I can add something like border collapse. Collapsed? Is that the... I've forgotten the syntax for that. Border collapse. That is the proper syntax. It's just not in the right place. That should go at the table level. All sorts of fun stuff there. That we can do. So we're just working, we're just working with our table, just adding a little bit of styling, trying to make it look interesting. So let's look at some other stuff with our tables here. Because we have more table components than what we have listed there. We have our TH component, which defines a table header row, and we want this. We want to use this. So with our tables in HTML, for accessibility purposes, we want to define what is the header row. And with our header row is for, kind of what the data is going to be. That's the top row, right? So like if we go back to our code pin here, what we have is we have the class name, the location, or room number, the days, and the times. So what I would want to do here is I would want to add another section at the top, right? And so we're actually going to start this with athead tag. Again, that's just another container tag. We're going to put in a tr for table row. And then instead of td for our cells, we're going to put ths. So this is going to be course name, course location, days, and times. And then we'll go ahead and close the row. And we'll go ahead and close the t-head tag. So now that's defined a header row for us. And we'll see that our header row actually looks a little different. Right? We have the special styling for it. Like it looks, we have bolded font here. Since we're using THs instead of TDs, it doesn't have the border around it that we defined on our table data cells. It just looks a little different, and we can focus our CSS on these elements to be different still, so that we can have these elements pop out and stand out. You know, these are our big headings. Another thing that we would want to do with these is we want to add our scope to these. Scope equals call. And so since this data is set up with everything in columns, right, what we want to tell our table is that the data below this header is what it belongs to. So math, science, English, history, these are all course names because they're in the scope of this column. You could also set a scope to row and have your header on the left-hand side. Right, so if I wanted to, I could make THs down the side, have the scope for the row. You know, for example, I could do something like this. We'll just take this and copy it, and we'll just remove it back out. You know, maybe I want to have something that's called like course 1. And in this case, my scope would be row. So if we look at our information here, we have course 1, which is math. So that's for this row. But now our header row's off because course 1's not a course name. So we'd want to go back and fix that later. Nonetheless. So since we're running our header across the top, we're going to put the column scope in all of these, and that's going to associate the data that is below these column headers with the information that's in them. And so that's more or less it. Like we've made a table, we've given it a header, we've styled it a little bit. We'll practice some more styling. Like if we want to, you know, style specially our header row, right? We can focus our t-head. We can give it a background color. You know, maybe we want it to be that background color that we have this border made here. So that's, what did we say? FF 7777. No, that's TD. Where's that background? Yeah, my border color. This one. Maybe we could put the background as being that. Maybe we can change our color to white. Put a little padding in there. Then we can also take our THs. Put a little padding in there. That looks good. We took padding out of the T-head, so that doesn't work there. And so you can see here a pretty interesting looking table that we've made here. I think I should be able to put that there, right? Guess not. Maybe I need to change my border spacing property to 0 pixels. There we go. That's what we want. So many properties, so much to remember, right? So now we have the borders collapsed, so they're right on top of each other. There's no spacing between our borders. We've set border spacing to 0. So we have a nice looking table here. Right? One of the interesting things that we can do here, which is one of the things that you probably want to do for your tables. You know, in a table this small is what we're dealing with here. You don't really have to worry about it. But in larger tables, what you might want to do is have every other row be a different, have a different background color so it kind of stands apart. And you could go down here applying a class to every other row, but we actually have something in CSS that'll do that for us, which is called int of type. So if I focus TR, and in parentheses, I put nth of type colon even. Right, let me just pull that up here because we have it. See, I've broken my, see, this should be a colon. I'm a little backwards with my syntax today. I'm a little out of sorts, but it's all right. We'll get there. Nth of type even, just like that. Background dash color. We can make a darker yellow, like something like a, let's say AA88. And there you can see every other row has that darker yellow color. I might want it a little lighter than that, just so there's not quite as much contrast. And so now we have every other row styled, which is great for if you're, if you have a long list, if you have a long data table, or you have a bunch of stuff in there, it sort of prevents you from, having different rows run together. And so really that's the long and the short of what we want to do with tables. We have a fairly attractive looking table here, and we can use a lot of the other CSS that we've talked about over the course of the semester. You can use color, background color on the different elements, and it'll change things. The only real CSS that we would need to remember are going to be these special border properties, which are the border collapsed, and the border spacing 0 pixels. We can remove these so we can see what they do without them. If I take out the border collapse, you can see that doesn't really do anything. Maybe they took that out of the code base. My border spacing 0 is really the big deal here, because when I remove it, it gives us those little spaces between all of our cells, which is not something that we want ideally. Although if that's a look that you like, that might be something that you're interested in. That's fine. Border spacing 0. We can set widths, we can set heights, we can, set these on all of our little cells. We can make a dot special class. Maybe make a background color that is a dark red. Something like that, and give it a color of white. And then we can go into a particular cell, like maybe this time for the math class, and add a class equals special right in there, like that. And that'll make that one particular cell different. right? So basically anything that we can do with our CSS, we can do with our tables. You know, that's one of the things about this stuff, is that it kind of compounds throughout the semester as we get into more and more stuff. But as I've said before, you know, tables are pretty simple. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. So we're actually going to go ahead and stop our live stream here. I'll give you this demo CodePen along with the recording here in just a bit. We'll hang out in the chat for a few minutes just in case there are any questions. If you're watching this later and you have any questions, please let me know. But that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.